The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Kate Middleton sat quietly in her private study, her fingers trembling as she held the medical report that would change everything. The words on the page seemed to blur together, but their meaning was crystal clear. The cancer had returned, and this time the doctors had been honest about what lay ahead. She had fought this battle before, keeping it hidden from the public eye with the same grace she brought to every royal duty. But now, at 38, with 3 young children who needed their mother, the weight of reality pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The treatment options were limited, and the prognosis was not what any of them had hoped for. William was away on a royal visit to Scotland, completely unaware of the devastating news that awaited him. Kate had specifically asked the medical team to wait until his return before sharing the results. She needed time to process this information herself, to find the strength she would need to tell her husband that their future together might be shorter than they had ever imagined. The palace corridors were unusually quiet that Tuesday afternoon. Staff members moved through their daily routines, preparing for upcoming events and managing the endless stream of official correspondence. Kate walked slowly through the halls she had called home for years, touching the familiar paintings and furniture as if seeing them for the first time. Each step felt deliberate, meaningful in a way that ordinary moments rarely did. In the nursery, she found Charlotte playing with her dolls while George worked on his homework at the small desk by the window. Louis was napping peacefully in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Kate stood in the doorway, watching her children with a mixture of overwhelming love and heartbreak. How could she explain to them what was happening? How could she prepare them for a future that might not include her? Charlotte looked up and smiled, her bright eyes lighting up the room. She ran to her mother with the innocent joy that only children possess, wrapping her small arms around Kate's legs. Kate knelt down and pulled her daughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair and memorizing the feeling of her warm embrace. The afternoon stretched on with painful normalcy, tea time, story reading, and the gentle chaos of family life continued as if nothing had changed. But for Kate, every moment felt precious and fleeting. She found herself taking mental photographs of George's concentrated expression as he worked on his mathematics, of Charlotte's infectious laughter as they played together, of Louis stirring softly in his sleep. Evening brought the familiar sound of William's car pulling up to the palace. Kate heard his footsteps on the stairs, his cheerful voice calling out to the children. She steeled herself for what was to come, knowing that once she spoke the words aloud, there would be no taking them back. Their world would shift permanently, and the carefree happiness of their family life would be forever changed. William appeared in the drawing room, still wearing his formal attire from the day's engagements. His face was bright with the satisfaction of a successful royal visit, and he moved toward Kate with the easy affection of a man who had no idea his world was about to crumble. He kissed her forehead gently and settled into the chair beside her, ready to share the details of his trip. Kate studied his face, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way his hand reached automatically for hers. She knew that in a few moments, she would see that expression change to one of shock, fear, and devastating grief. The knowledge of what she was about to do to him, to their family, felt like a physical weight in her chest. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking the passage of time that suddenly seemed both precious and terrifying. Outside, London continued its evening routine. Millions of people going about their lives unaware that within the walls of Kensington Palace, a conversation was about to take place that would change everything for the royal family. Kate reached for the medical report she had placed on the side table, her hands shaking slightly. William noticed the movement, and his expression shifted to one of concern. He had always been attuned to her moods, able to read the subtle signs that others missed. Now, as he saw the papers in her hands and the serious expression on her face, she could see the first flicker of fear cross his features. The room felt impossibly quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock and the distant sounds of London traffic. Kate looked at her husband, the father of her children, the man she had pledged to love, for better or for worse. She knew that the words she was about to speak would test that promise in ways they had never imagined when they stood at the altar all those years ago. She opened her mouth to begin, then closed it again, struggling to find the right way to deliver news that would shatter his world. William leaned forward, his concern deepening as he recognized the gravity of whatever she was about to tell him. His hand tightened around hers, offering comfort and support even before he knew what kind of support she would need. The medical report felt heavy in her other hand, its clinical language unable to capture the human cost of its conclusions. Kate had read it so many times that afternoon that she had memorized every word, every percentage, every timeline. But knowing the facts and speaking them aloud to the person she loved most were two entirely different things. Finally, she found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. The first words were the hardest, breaking through the peaceful evening like a stone through glass. Once she began, the rest would follow, and there would be no going back to the innocent happiness of just moments before. William's face went completely white as Kate's words sank in. The medical report slipped from his trembling fingers and scattered across the Persian rug, the formal language of diagnosis and prognosis now spoken aloud in the most personal terms possible. For a moment, he simply stared at his wife, his mind refusing to process what she had just told him. Kate watched her husband's world collapse in real time. The confident, composed prince she had married seemed to shrink before her eyes, his shoulders sagging under the weight of information no person should ever have to hear about someone they love. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly, as if his brain couldn't form the questions that were flooding through his mind. The silence stretched between them, heavy and painful. Outside, London carried on with its evening routine, but inside the drawing room of Kensington Palace, time seemed to have stopped entirely. Kate reached for William's hand, but he pulled back instinctively, not from rejection, but from shock so profound that even the simplest human contact felt overwhelming. Finally, William found his voice, though it came out cracked and broken. He asked the questions that every person asks when faced with such news. How long had she known? What were the options? Could the doctors be wrong? Each question came faster than the last, as if asking them quickly enough might somehow change the answers Kate had to give. Kate answered each question with the same quiet strength she had shown throughout her royal duties. The cancer had been detected during her recent routine screening. The specialists had run additional tests to be certain. The treatment options were limited because of how the disease had progressed. She spoke in calm, measured tones, but William could see the fear beneath her composed exterior. As the reality of the situation began to settle in, William's shock gave way to desperate determination. He began talking rapidly about second opinions, experimental treatments, and specialists around the world. His voice grew louder and more urgent as he outlined plans to fight this diagnosis with every resource at their disposal. Money was no object, privacy concerns could be managed, and royal duties could be postponed indefinitely. Kate listened to his increasingly frantic planning with a mixture of love and heartbreak. She understood his need to fix this, to use his position and resources to battle an enemy that didn't care about titles or wealth. But she also knew, from hours of conversations with the medical team, that some fights couldn't be won simply through determination and privilege. Gently, she interrupted his stream of plans and proposals. Her voice was soft but firm as she explained what the doctors had already told her about experimental treatments and second opinions. They had already consulted with the best specialists in Europe and America. The diagnosis was unfortunately clear, and while treatment could potentially extend her time, the ultimate outcome remained unchanged. William's face crumpled as the full weight of her words hit him. This wasn't a problem he could solve through royal connections or diplomatic influence. This wasn't a crisis that could be managed through careful planning and public relations strategies. This was life and death, and for the first time in his adult life, his title and position offered no protection against what they were facing. He stood up abruptly and began pacing the room, his hands running through his hair as he struggled to process what Kate had told him. The composed prince, who had handled countless public appearances and state functions with grace and dignity, was now completely undone by the most private and personal crisis imaginable. His breathing became rapid and shallow as panic began to set in. Kate rose from her chair and approached him carefully, the way one might approach a wounded animal. She could see the terror in his eyes, the same terror she had felt when she first received the diagnosis. But she had had hours to begin processing this information, while William was experiencing the full force of it all at once. When she reached him, she placed her hands gently on his arms, trying to ground him in the moment. His whole body was trembling, and she could feel the tension in his muscles as he fought against the reality of what she had told him. For several long minutes, they stood together in the middle of the room, neither speaking, both trying to find their footing in this new and terrifying landscape. Gradually, William's breathing began to slow. The initial shock was giving way to a deep, profound sadness that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep in his chest. Kate could see the exact moment when the full reality of their situation truly hit him. His knees buckled slightly, and she had to steady him as the strength seemed to leave his body entirely. They made their way back to the sofa, moving slowly like much older people than they actually were. William sat heavily, his head in his hands, while Kate settled beside him. The medical report was still scattered on the floor where it had fallen, its pages a stark reminder of the clinical reality behind their emotional devastation. For the first time since Kate had begun speaking, William asked about the children. How much did they need to know? When should they be told? How could they possibly explain this to 3 young children who saw their parents as invincible figures who could fix any problem and kiss away any hurt? The questions came quietly now, each one carrying the weight of parental responsibility mixed with personal grief. Kate had been thinking about these same questions all afternoon. She had no easy answers, but she had some thoughts about how they might approach this impossible conversation. They would need to be honest but age-appropriate, she explained. The children would need time to process the information, and they would need both parents to be strong for them even when strength felt impossible to maintain. As they talked about their children, both William and Kate began to cry. Not the dramatic sobbing of movie scenes, but the quiet, steady tears of people facing a loss so profound that their bodies couldn't contain the emotion. They held each other on the sofa, 2 people who had promised to love each other in sickness and in health, now facing the true test of those words. The conversation turned to practical matters, though neither wanted to discuss them. There were medical decisions to be made, treatment schedules to coordinate, and the complex question of how much information to share with the royal household and the public. Kate's health had always been a matter of public interest, and managing this crisis would require careful consideration of both personal and public needs. William struggled with the idea of continuing with royal duties while Kate was facing such a serious illness. How could he attend ribbon cuttings and state dinners knowing what his wife was going through? How could he maintain the public facade of normalcy when their private world was falling apart? Kate, ever mindful of duty and service, gently reminded him that maintaining some normalcy might be important for all of them, especially the children. As the evening wore on, their conversation moved through waves of practical planning, emotional processing, and quiet moments of simply holding each other. The palace around them continued its usual rhythm, with staff members going about their duties unaware of the crisis unfolding in the family's private quarters. This sense of life continuing normally around them felt both comforting and surreal. Near midnight, they finally made their way upstairs to check on the children. George, Charlotte, and Louis were all sleeping peacefully, their young faces relaxed and innocent in the dim light from the hallway. Kate and William stood in each doorway for long minutes, watching their children sleep and trying to memorize these quiet moments of peace before everything would inevitably change. In their own bedroom, they held each other through the night, neither sleeping much but finding comfort in physical closeness. They talked quietly about memories, about their hopes and fears, and about how to make whatever time they had left together as meaningful as possible. The future that had seemed so certain just hours before now felt fragile and precious in an entirely new way. 3 months had passed since that devastating evening in the drawing room. Kate had undergone intensive treatment, enduring chemotherapy sessions that left her weak and exhausted but determined to fight for every possible day with her family. William had rearranged his entire schedule to be by her side, attending medical appointments and managing the children's routines with a devotion that touched everyone around them. The palace staff had been informed on a need-to-know basis, and a small circle of trusted advisors helped manage the careful balance between Kate's medical needs and the minimal public duties she insisted on maintaining. To the outside world, the Duchess of Cambridge was taking a temporary step back from public engagements for personal reasons. The truth remained closely guarded within the family. On this particular morning, Kate woke feeling different. The persistent pain that had become her constant companion seemed somehow more intense, and she struggled to catch her breath in a way that hadn't happened before. William noticed immediately when he brought her morning tea, his face showing the concern that had become permanently etched in his features over the past few months. The call to the medical team was swift and discreet. Within an hour, Kate's primary physician was at the palace, conducting examinations in the privacy of their bedroom. William paced outside in the hallway, his footsteps wearing a path in the antique carpet as he waited for news. When the doctor emerged, his expression told William everything he needed to know before any words were spoken. The cancer had progressed more rapidly than anyone had anticipated. The treatments that had shown some initial promise were no longer effective, and Kate's body was beginning to shut down. The doctor spoke in gentle but direct terms about what they could expect in the coming days and weeks. It was time to focus on comfort and dignity rather than curative measures. William felt his legs give out beneath him. He leaned against the wall for support, his body trembling as the reality of losing Kate became immediate rather than theoretical. The doctor continued speaking about pain management and hospice care, but the words seemed to come from very far away. All William could think about was how to tell 3 young children that their mother was dying. When the doctor left, William returned to Kate's bedside. She was propped up against pillows, her face pale, but her eyes still bright with the intelligence and warmth that had first attracted him to her years ago. She could see in his expression that he had received the update from the medical team, and she reached for his hand with fingers that felt fragile as bird bones. They didn't need to discuss what the doctor had told him. Kate had felt the changes in her body and had suspected what the examination would reveal. Instead, they talked about the children and how to help them through what was coming. They discussed the practical arrangements that would need to be made and the people who would need to be informed. But mostly, they simply held each other and tried to find peace in being together. Over the next few days, Kate's condition deteriorated rapidly. She slept more and ate less, her strength ebbing away like a tide that wouldn't return. William barely left her side, managing royal duties through phone calls and video conferences when absolutely necessary. The children were told that Mummy was very sick and needed extra rest, a simple explanation that would have to suffice for now. Palace staff moved through the halls more quietly than usual, their faces reflecting the somber mood that had settled over Kensington Palace. Flowers arrived from well-wishers around the world, though the public remained unaware of the true severity of Kate's condition. The family's closest friends and relatives made discreet visits, saying their goodbyes in the private comfort of Kate's bedroom. One evening, as William sat reading quietly beside Kate's bed, she stirred and asked him to help her to the window. Though she was weak, she wanted to see the sunset one more time. William carefully supported her as they stood together looking out at London spreading beneath them, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Kate spoke softly about how grateful she felt for the life they had built together. She talked about watching their children grow up in the palace halls, about the joy she had found in royal duties that had once seemed intimidating, and about the deep love she felt for William and their family. Her voice was weak, but her words were clear, and William treasured every syllable. As her final days approached, Kate made specific requests about how she wanted to spend her remaining time. She asked to have each child visit her privately so she could have individual conversations with them. She wanted to record video messages for important future occasions like birthdays and graduations. Most importantly, she wanted William to promise that he would help their children remember her not as someone who was sick, but as someone who loved them completely. The last conversation between Kate and William took place in the early hours of a quiet Thursday morning. Kate had been drifting in and out of consciousness, but she suddenly became alert and focused. She looked directly into his eyes and spoke with a clarity that surprised them both, given how weak she had become. Her final words were about love and hope. She told William how proud she was of the man and father he had become. She asked him to find happiness again someday, though she knew he couldn't imagine that possibility in the moment. She spoke about their children and the bright futures she envisioned for them. Most importantly, she told him that loving him and being loved by him had been the greatest privilege of her life. When she finished speaking, Kate closed her eyes and settled back against her pillows with a peaceful expression. William held her hand and whispered his own words of love and gratitude, though he wasn't sure if she could still hear him. Within an hour, she was gone, slipping away so quietly that the exact moment of her passing was impossible to pinpoint. William sat beside her bed for a long time after she died, still holding her hand and trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The woman who had been his partner, his closest friend, and the mother of his children was gone, leaving behind a silence that felt overwhelming in its completeness. When he finally left the bedroom to inform the household staff and begin the difficult process of telling their children, William walked slowly down the palace hallway. Each step felt monumental, carrying him away from the life he had known with Kate and toward an uncertain future as a widowed father and a single parent to 3 young children who would soon learn that their world had changed forever. The morning sun was beginning to filter through the tall windows, casting the same long shadows that had marked the beginning of this journey 3 months earlier. But now everything was different, and William knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The hallway that had once felt like home now felt impossibly long and empty, stretching out before him like the years he would have to navigate without the woman who had been his anchor and his joy. Staff members who encountered him in the corridor immediately understood from his expression that Kate was gone. Word spread quickly through the palace in hushed whispers, and preparations began for the difficult days ahead. The public would need to be informed, arrangements would need to be made, and 3 young children would need to be told that their mother had died. But for now, William simply walked through the halls of Kensington Palace, his footsteps echoing in the quiet morning air, carrying with him Kate's last words of love and the enormous responsibility of honoring her memory while building a future for their children. The hallway had witnessed their greatest joy and their deepest sorrow, and now it would witness the beginning of whatever came next.